No matter how devastating it made her, Kayla stared at the television. Her heart dropped in her chest as she watched the news report. The moment was surreal. Here she was, seeing footage of her husband taking his last moments on Earth, driving his car into a bridge. Her eyes were red-rimmed as tears ran down her face, and she felt empty and devastated. She had no desire to get out of bed or do anything other than mourn the loss of her beloved. Even after so many years together, it was impossible to shake off the feeling that something might have been done differently, if only to save his life. She had realized late that her husband's depression was due to him losing his job, and she hadn't been able to help him. The fact that he struggled for a long time and she never noticed broke her heart and drove her to angrily throw something, anything, out of frustration. The vase by the window suffered that action, and with the broken pieces in front of her, Kayla placed her hands over her face and wished she could turn back time and make things right again. Every time she tried to sleep, all she could do was replay the happy times together with her husband and the painful moment when he made the last desperate decision to take his own life that cold morning 2 weeks ago. They were so young, and they had so much future to look forward to. All of their plans and dreams were gone in an instant, leaving Kayla with a deep sense of heartache and regret. She felt that if only she had done something differently, it may not have happened at all. At night, she lay in her bed wishing for one more moment with him, but instead, all she could have were sorrowful thoughts running through her mind as her husband remained in eternity. Not once had she ever felt so alone and defeated in her life. With every waking moment and every breath she took, a heavy burden weighed on her shoulders, like an anchor pulling her into the depths of depression. She tried to distract herself with kind thoughts and memories of the past, but it felt impossible to stop the spiral. She wanted out, to be free, to launch free from what choked her. Taking the bold step for that moment, she stepped out of her house and decided to go for a walk. She was surprised when she encountered her younger sister sitting on a park bench and abruptly snapped out of her reverie. She narrated her situation, and her sister suggested that Kayla explore counseling. Though Kayla was resistant to the idea, the two sisters continued the walk together, discussing Kayla's options for treatment. Later that day, Kayla returned home still as troubled as she had left. The only ray of hope was the suggestion her sister gave, something she was yet to reverberate with. Her dilemma wasn't getting deeper the more she thought about it. She valued her sister's opinion, but she wasn't sure if accepting her advice was the right thing to do. Her sister had mentioned that she had a neighbor who had some insight into the situation. He used to be a priest. Although Kayla had never spoken to him before, she suddenly felt overwhelmed by the feeling of needing to hear his perspective on the matter. It gave her some hesitation, but ultimately Kayla decided to take her sister's advice and find out what this neighbor would say. She told her sister to bring the priest. The next day was filled with anticipation as she tidied her home, preparing for the arrival of the priest. She bustled around to ensure all the details were taken care of, fiddling with items until she found contentment in their arrangement. Though excitement bubbled in her chest, it was remnants of hope that energized her movements. The day ahead was still a mystery, but Kayla couldn't deny the spark of optimism that kept her going. Kayla was initially surprised to see how young the priest, Father Timothy, was, considering what she had heard of priests. She expected someone older and wearing official clothing, so when he came out dressed casually in jeans and a t-shirt, it took her aback. Despite his unconventional attire, Kayla could feel the sympathy radiating from him as her sister explained everything that occurred to bring them both there that day. His handshake felt warm and comforting and briefly helped ease some of the fear she had been grappling with over the past few days. Indeed, despite her initial surprise at his youthful appearance, Kayla quickly understood why her sister thought that Father Timothy would be perfect for their situation. After lunch, Kayla and the priest scheduled a meeting at her house in 2 days. Her sister was pleased, and she left with the priest. The next day, Kayla's mother-in-law visited. Kayla sobbed and felt her throat go dry as her mother-in-law hurled accusations at her. To Kayla, It felt like the charges were being pressed against an empty shell where her heart used to be, hollowed out from the sheer weight of grief, pulling her into a seemingly bottomless abyss. She also remembered the mean text that had been sent by her sister-in-law just a week before, and wished that such hatred, unleashed on someone who was grieving so deeply, could have found anywhere else to rest. After her mother-in-law left, Kayla collapsed onto the floor of her closet, surrounded by pictures of her deceased husband, wishing desperately for death to take away any remnants of life in her desolate shell of a body. She felt numb as she inadvertently retrieved a blade from one of her drawers and relished the thoughts of dying as fast as possible. She held the blade between her fingers, and with every passing second, she could feel the temptation to escape from all the pain and suffering overwhelm her. The relief that ending it all could bring was almost too much to resist, yet she did. She dropped the blade and let out a torrent of tears. The agony of her emotional distress had been building up for so long, and it was only then that Kayla realized just how badly she needed help. Mustering up what little courage remained inside of her, she managed to compose a message to the priest in which she reminded him of their pre-existing appointment. Perhaps through counseling, she would be able to find strength enough within herself to cope with life's hardships once more. It was needless to say that Kayla had been eagerly awaiting the arrival of the priest, and her anticipation grew as she heard her doorbell ringing. She welcomed him into her home and guided him to the dining room, ready to start their counseling session. The session was long but intimate, as the priest slowly asked Kayla questions about how she met her deceased husband and why they had fallen in love, allowing her a chance to reflect on fond memories. After 2 hours, Kayla was exhausted, yet filled with a feeling of relief that washed over her as she'd been able to share her feelings and find some solace in talking with someone who understood her situation. They agreed to meet again the next week, and the priest took his leave. The counseling sessions became frequent from then on. Maybe it was unusual, but Kayla felt her breath quicken every time the priest walked into the room for their sessions. She developed a strong connection with him and could feel an inexplicable attraction toward him each time he was around. The butterflies in her belly would flutter to life like little sparks of fire that ignited an intense passion she felt burning within her. Despite her internal struggles, they continued having counseling sessions, and Kayla felt happier by the day she saw herself surrounded by his presence. As Kayla began to open up and share her innermost thoughts, the counseling session between her and the priest started to take on a life of its own. Instead of being confined to her sitting room, the conversations expanded outside. After months of sessions in Kayla's cozy little sitting room, they decided to switch things up and try meeting in public. From sprawling parks to sun-drenched patios, their conversations blossomed into something new as they were able to connect on a deeper level. Their relationship flourished as they opened up while being surrounded by the colors of nature and the smells of incredible food. Meeting outside of the limitations of walls not only transcended their therapeutic sessions, but also awakened a new appreciation for the world around them, something Kayla had not done in a very long time. On one of such restaurant appointments, Kayla and Father Timothy had just finished discussing the progress Kayla had made in her counseling sessions when into the outdoor setting burst Kayla's sister-in-law, her face twisted with rage. She immediately accused Kayla of being a husband killer and took great joy in the shock on Kayla's face. Kayla hated how the carefully crafted composure she wore evaporated in a matter of seconds. All the while, Father Timothy stood silently, unable to comprehend what was happening or diffuse the situation any further. In the end, he realized that taking Kayla home was their only option, and as they began walking away, Kayla's sister-in-law's angry taunts grew more distant behind them. When they got back to the house, Kayla sat on the sofa trying to recover her cool, but was disturbed by Father Timothy's approach. She was astounded and confused when he reached out to her with an overly familiar embrace. Although such a display of physical affection coming from the priest was comforting to Kayla, it stirred up a range of confusing emotions due to the innuendo that could be interpreted as this unexpected gesture of familiarity. Kayla didn't know how to feel in such a situation and wondered if there was any deeper meaning to Father Timothy's unusual behavior. She felt her heart beat even faster as Father Timothy's hands traveled toward her cheeks. She was too shocked to comprehend what was happening, but before she could register it all, she had moved away from him and sternly told him to leave. The air was thick with tension and discomfort, making the entire exchange even more awkward than it had already been. Although she never expected Father Timothy to behave in such a way, she knew she had done the right thing in refusing his advances. With a heavy heart, she avoided the priest for days. Seeing him reminded her of the severity of what he had done, and his apology seemed insincere and empty compared to the hurt she felt. But when he showed up on her doorstep, saying sorry like a young child, pleading with her to forgive him, it softened her resolve. Despite this, her trust in him was still shaken. She accepted the apology but didn't let him in, remaining wary as she bid him farewell with a sad smile. The following week, her sister came with some unsettling news. Father Timothy had been excommunicated from the church due to inappropriate behavior. Even more disturbingly, she had discovered that he had taken advantage of young nuns in his role as a priest. Kayla felt an overwhelming sadness for these victims. She didn't tell her sister how she would have also ended up as one of his victims, but thanked her for bringing the information before any damage was done. She hated the disgust that welled up in her for developing feelings for a man like Father Timothy. Her mind flipped at the realization that she wasn't supposed to even call him a father. She decided to cut off all contact with him. To heal completely, she also decided that seeing a professional therapist would be the best course of action so that she could start to move forward from the pain and betrayal.